Honesty, a must in the workplace. And we are going to start with the overview, which is on page 117 in your books. On page 117. You're going to find it? Alrighty, so starting off, and as we go to the lesson, we are going to go back and review chapter 6, but let's learn what we're going to be covering in this chapter. It says, a lack of honesty in the workplace is prevalent in society today. An alarming amount of CEOs, managers, and supervisors of all companies all around the world have been found guilty of crimes such as embezzlement, fraud, kickbacks, and bribes. But it does not stop there. Dishonesty while on the job has additional outlets such as falsifying timesheets and time cards, taking extra time for breaks and lunch, taking credit for work done by another coworker, discrediting a coworker, using work supplies for personal use, as well as harassing a coworker, then not accepting responsibility. So let's break that down. First of all, it's telling us that what we're going to be covering in this chapter is a really, really big problem. That word prevalent means it's a big problem, that it's encompassing an alarming amount of people. And it gave us all the different examples: embezzlement, fraud, kickbacks. And remember the example of the fall of Enron in the Building Moral Excellence unit on page 193. You can reference that there. That was a very thought-provoking example of what occurs with CEOs who are dishonest. And then it tells us all the many ways. Have you ever stopped and thought about a lot of these ways as being dishonest? Some of them, you might not consider it, but it's giving us an opportunity to be aware of it so we can avoid those things. So we can be aware of those things. And I like how it talks about not accepting responsibility. When we don't accept responsibility, we are being dishonest. And not just to the person who we might be placing blame on, not just to our person we're accountable to, but we're dishonest to ourselves because we're not allowing to give ourselves that opportunity to grow. So if you'd like to reference page 105, paragraph 1, for that accepting responsibility, it talks about, using scapegoats and putting that responsibility on them. So that's a reference that you can put. It says all of this adds up to a loss of money, trust, and confidence. And if you think about it, it lists money, but right after, yes, there's the physical aspect of the business, but trust and confidence are equally as devastating as the lack or the loss of that money. The trust that you would have between your coworkers or the confidence that you would have in yourself. Remember that trust is very important, and it's something that you work to earn. It's not something that's just handed out to you. So even the simple examples, or what are seemingly simple examples like we covered, if those result in the loss of trust, that's something very, very valuable that you've lost. It's not something to be taken lightly. Okay, the second paragraph says, workers who are honest uphold company policies, they arrive to work on time, and adhere strictly to their allotted time for break and lunch. So here we have the flip side. Honest employees are respectful of their coworkers and would never accept credit for the work they did not do. They use work supplies conservatively, never wasting or stealing items. Honest actions should be encouraged in the workplace through teaching, motivation, and even incentives. And we know that the biggest form of encouragement is through example, right? If someone sees you doing something, whether it's a fellow coworker, whether it's an employer that's demonstrating that to their employees, example is one of the biggest ways you encourage someone to do something, especially if you do it in a way that makes them want to do it, right? And it says, encourage workers to be honest because honesty in the workplace is vital to a trusting and healthy work environment. And I underline that word vital because we talked about environments and how important they are and how they shape who we are. They shape our very being. They shape our character. They shape our personality. They shape our work ethic. Environments are very important. So our honesty is not just vital to that environment, but it's vital to ourselves as individuals and the people around us as well. So that's a little glimpse of what we're going to be talking about in this chapter. So let's turn over to the next page, which is page 119, and take a look at our lesson plan. So we start with the purpose and the objective, is that students will appreciate the value of honesty in the workplace and learn behaviors that demonstrate honesty. And I underlines that word value. Because like we talked about in the junior high series, as when you're teaching this lesson, whether you're teaching it to employees or employers or whoever you're teaching to, it's important that the purpose and the objective is fulfilled. Notice it didn't say teach them to be honest. It didn't say teach them to demonstrate honesty. It said teach them to appreciate the value of it. So it's not just enough to tell them this is what you have to do. This is how you make your workplace great. You want them to understand why they should do it. Because if they understand why, they can tell the next person why. And the next person can tell the next person why. Not just, oh, it's something that we should do. So what's really effective in teaching anything is for the person themselves to understand the importance and the value of it. Then materials, paper, pens, and pencils, and now we have our procedures. So we're going to review the previous lesson, responsibility brings results, and I'm going to go over these questions with you right now. So you can look over them, think about your answers. So the first question is, in what ways are you responsible in your work environments? The second question is, name some positive character traits that help us to be responsible. And the third question is, how can we be responsible when communicating with those in authority? Okay, so let's start with the first one. What are some ways that you're responsible in your work environments? Anyone have any things that they'd like to share? Okay, I'll give you a way that I'm responsible in my work environment. I like a very clean and organized area, and I cannot function or think clearly if that area is not clean and organized. So I try my very best, even though I'm busy and you're moving around, you're doing 5 million different things, I try my very best to make that area clean so that when I ask other people if they wouldn't mind making their area clean, they see my example first, and they say, okay, she's trying to, make sure that her area is clean, so let's me also put in that effort. That's one way that I try to be responsible. Anyone else have any ones that they'd like to share? No? Okay. Next question. Name some positive character traits that help us to be responsible. And challenge if you can think of some that aren't listed there. Anyone think of any? We have the obvious of self-control, the foundation of everything. Respect, humility, compassion. Any more that you can think of that help us be responsible? I was thinking of educated. You do great. With great minds think alike. Yes, educated. Because how can you be responsible for something that you don't know the facts about? How can you be responsible whether it's, you don't have to know everything there is to know, but did you ask questions? Did you get the necessary information? Did you, go the extra mile to figure out how you can do your best? So I think being educated is a very important trait, and being determined and disciplined. Because like we talked about, reputation, not all the time you're not going to trust you right away, or you're not going to do things perfectly the first time, but that discipline and that determination to follow through positively and the best of your ability, no matter what, I think is very important to be responsible. And the next question is, how can we be responsible when communicating with those in authority? And we have the obvious, use a proper tone of voice, as well as appropriate facial expressions and body language. And remember the tips that we went through. We had some very important tips with those. Alrighty, so getting into this chapter, it says, inform students that in today's lesson, they will explore why being honest is a valuable asset in the workplace. Again, that word valuable, why it should be important to them. Ask if anyone has ever had his or her possessions stolen, or knows of anyone who was stolen from while at work. Anyone had their possessions stolen? Or know somebody? Okay, so that's a personal thing that we can relate to. It says, have students read the introduction found on page 123 and discuss the consequences of living in a society where dishonesty manifests itself in so many ways. Now, I think it's very important that they asked us to reflect on an experience that we had. Because as human beings, one of our slight flaws is that most times we think of ourselves first, right? We think of how we feel in situations. We think of how it affects us. By getting them to stop and reflect, how did that make you feel when it occurred to you? Or how did it make you feel when someone you knew occurred to them? Did you feel any types of feelings? And by getting them to reflect on the way they felt, they can add that same value to the feelings of others. They can understand that this is important because I don't want anyone else to feel the way that I felt at that point in time. So that's an important thing that we should keep in mind. And let's turn over to page 123. Now, I'd like you to close your eyes and imagine this part. It says, have you ever considered how our lives would change if everyone was honest? Think about that. What do you do in the morning? You make sure you have your keys, right? If you can't find them, it takes you maybe an extra 15 to 30 minutes to find your keys. What if you didn't need keys? What about if you accidentally lock your keys in your car and that sets you back? What if you didn't need to lock your car? What about when you get to work? Have you ever had to punch in the security code or wait outside because someone didn't unlock the door? What if we didn't need security systems? Think of how drastically our days would change and our lives would change if everyone was honest. So that vision is what we're striving for in this chapter, or at least to get people to understand the importance and why it's important that we get to that point. It says the news media is full of stories about the consequences of dishonesty in our society. Increasingly, we hear of CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies being given hefty prison sentences for crimes such as grand larceny, fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Companies have gone out of business, leaving unsuspecting employees and stockholders empty-handed, unable to care for their families and plan for their futures. So that reminds us of the ripple effect, right? Whether it's a CEO, if it's a big company, responsible for maybe thousands of employees, right? If it's a small company, those are personal people that they interact with every single day. They know their families. They know, their names. And those are the peoples whose livelihood they take away by dishonesty. So that's the ripple effect of how dishonesty starts to affect not just our lives, but the people around us. It says many other forms of dishonesty never make it to the news, but nonetheless affect our society. So it doesn't really matter the big impact, right? We hear the big stories, the fall of Enron. We hear the stories of multi-million-dollar companies, but it doesn't matter whether it's a multi-million-dollar company or whether it's a company with two people, whether it's a big department store or whether it's a small business. No matter, it affects someone. And the choices matter even when you go home and when you're not looking. Your choices stay behind and they affect other people. It says in businesses throughout the world, employee theft is out of control. From stealing time to office equipment, there's no end to the items that are stolen by employees from countless businesses worldwide. The consequences of these thefts are almost as varied as the items that are stolen. If found stealing, an employee can be immediately terminated and, according to what was stolen, charged and jailed. Now, that word varied really stands out to me because a lot of times, we think really quickly. Okay, if I do this, all right, this might occur and that might occur. All right, but if that occurs, then I'm just going to do this. And if that occurs, okay, it'll be fine. Right? We can quickly ration away and rationalize why we're going to do something. But it says varied because you cannot account for all the many ways. You don't have enough time in the day to stand there and account for all the various either consequences or rewards that can come from your actions. So we can't let ourselves off the hook and absolve ourselves of the responsibility of, well, I thought it through. And I thought if this occurs, then I have a contingency plan for that. And if that occurs, then everything will be fine. You don't know that because the consequences are varied. And there's so many that we cannot account for. Some of them are businesses suffer millions of dollars in losses per year, affecting both employees and customers. Rules and policies are put in place to curtail or eliminate future thefts, and a pervasive lack of trust often becomes a permanent part of the work environment. Now think of that. A lot of businesses, are, family hand-me-downs. You can see, in business since 1856. Now, when you walk into that environment, you don't think of all the previous stories that took place in that workplace. If you are working in a place where it might not be the best environment, stop and think. What choices were made by the people before you that created that environment? If you're working in a pleasant environment, wow, people had to take the time out of the day to make choices to create this environment. if it's handed down through generations, those generations had to make sure that their company was built on honesty, was built on compassion, was built on respect. These are things that we oftentimes take for granted, right? But when we stop and think about it, all of those things are made up of people making choices. And oftentimes, those choices become a permanent part of the brand, of the workplace, of whatever it might be. It says, now, what if all the employees and all the businesses in society were honest in all of their interactions and business dealings? Think about that. For one, prices would be a lot cheaper, right? That's one positive outcome. Would there be such things as company theft, blue and white collar crimes, fraud, and embezzlement? The answer, of course, is no. When we choose to be forthright, free of deceit, and truthful, we can make moral choices that respect our work environments and ourselves. Okay, and along with ourselves, they can respect our future selves as well. Because a lot of times, people, they're in difficult situations and they make choices out of the spur of the moment. Oh, well, I don't know how I'm going to pay rent, so let me just take a little bit of money out of the till, right? And you can pay your rent that month. You're fine right now. Everything's great. It affected me in a great way. I paid my bills I needed to pay. I'm fine. But when you get caught and you have to go to your next job, your future self, that might be all set up. You don't need to pay rent that month. Things are great, and you want to move up in your job. But that's holding you back. So it doesn't just affect us right here and right now. It can affect our future selves as well. And at the bottom, we have the quote, honesty really is the best policy. All across the board, doesn't matter what it is, it's really the best thing to do. Alrighty, so that concludes page 123. So let's turn back to our lesson plan. Procedure 4 says, have students share what honesty means to them. Talk about the fact that people consider honesty in different ways. Have students read the section entitled, Being Honest, What Exactly Is It?, found on page 124. Explain that with so many different ideas of what honesty means, it is important to identify what is honest behavior in the work environment. Have students read from the section entitled, What It Means to Be Honest in the Work Environment, found on page 124. Now, if you think about it, this can eliminate a lot of conflicts and a lot of problems if we lay out what's expected of us, from the get-go. Because being honest, what exactly is it? Do we measure honesty on a thermometer as we do the temperature? No. Do you feel that certain situations require absolute honesty while others weigh heavily on whether or not harm is brought to others? If this is an accurate assessment of how you've grown to view the subject of honesty, then realize you are not alone. In considering some of our daily interactions, we recognize at times the need for restraint in that we simply cannot always say what we are thinking. Doing so would come across as rude, thoughtless, or callous. Therefore, we tend to soften the blow of our opinions or point of view by adjusting our words to avoid hurt feelings. An example would be, I like the dress, it's very nice, but it seems to me that the blue one you wore yesterday really suited you well, when you may not like it at all. By and large, learning the many different aspects of honesty and their impact on our lives will prove beneficial to interact successfully. So that is a very important line. Learning the many different aspects of honesty takes care, right? It takes compassion, it takes consideration, it takes respect, the ability to stop and realize, okay, it's not just my view of it that's important. All the different aspects are important, and their impact on our lives, right? So it's not just, okay, well, this is how it affects this person. It affects everyone. Will prove beneficial to interact successfully. Why? Because we understand the value of it. We know why it's important. So therefore, we're more likely to put effort into it. It says, nothing will devastate a friendship, a coworker, or a family relationship faster than giving a candid opinion at an unwanted moment. Real problems occur when our verbal and physical acts of dishonesty cross the lines of what is acceptable. These dishonest acts can cause harm to others, lead to a lack of trust or confidence, and end with property loss or damage or even loss of life. So cross the lines, that reminds us of what? Morality, right? The line between right and wrong. So what they're saying is take the time to think. All right, you need to say something. You want to be honest? Do you want to be dishonest? Think about the lines of morality. Will it cause harm? Will it lead to a loss of trust or confidence? Will it cause harm to property? Will it cause harm to life? Those are the important factors. Then it says, honest, to be truthful, fair, free of lies, and sincere. Now, I like that word sincere because we talked about our tone of voice, and we talked about our words, and we talked about our body language. Part of that honesty is making sure that those things match, right? So when we're saying something, to communicating to someone, making sure that we're saying it out of care and concern, we're saying it out of, the pure intentions is a part of that honesty. Now, we obsess what it means to be honest to ourselves. Now, what does it mean to be honest in the work environment? It says being honest will take determination and self-discipline. But one thing is sure, stealing from one's place of employment, whether it is time, money, food from the walk-in freezer, or toilet paper from the supply closet, is wrong. So it's saying, okay, it'll take some discipline, but here's the line, here's the morality, right? The line is there. If it harms someone else, you're taking something, you're stealing, you're taking that permission, that right of ownership from them, it's wrong. There's no way to rationalize around it. There's no way to give yourself an excuse. It's just wrong. In fact, you can only take an item from your place of employment if given permission from someone who has the authority to make that decision. That's an important thing, right? Can't just be anyone. It has to be someone who has the rights of ownership to it in the first place. In other words, you cannot get permission from a coworker to take property home that belongs at work. Keep in mind that everything you see in your work environment belongs to either a coworker or the company you work for and should be respected. And what's the definition of respect, right? To value and appreciate someone, to show care and concern, to see them as important as yourself. So if that belonged to you, if you ever had something on your desk, whether it's your best luck pen or something, and someone else says, okay, yeah, you can go ahead and use it, how does that make you feel? Especially if the person doesn't put it back or breaks it, how does that make you feel? So respecting them, important, valuing their feelings, their right of ownership as important as our own, means that we go to the right person whenever we need to receive that permission. It says this is the mindset, setting our minds in advance, that an honest person has, and it is this mindset that we must all adopt in order to practice honesty while on the job. And that word mindset, you have to set your mind. It's not something that's on the spur of the moment. It's something that you have to condition yourself through your thoughts, your feelings, and your action, and that consistency and self-discipline to where it just becomes a part of who you are. It's an integral part of your character. It says, according to a study done by the Department of Commerce, 1/3 of all employees routinely pilfer from their employers, and more than 80% have done it at least once. Now, I don't want to do math here, but let's say a company roughly has 1,000 employees. 800 of them have stolen something at some point in time. When you put it like that, that's a little scary, right? Whether it's, okay, I take this pen and put it in my bag, what we call, mindless actions, okay? If 800 people stole a pen, that's 800 pens. How much does 800 pens cost that company, who then has to replace those 800 pens? If 800 people stole an eraser, how much does replacing 800 erasers cost? When we put it on a grand scale, we can see, okay, we can see the impact. But it matters no matter how big or small, because respect is value for everyone and everything in all life, no matter the value that we place on it. Continuing, it says, of course, not taking or touching the belongings of others without permission is another part of being honest. Honesty in your work environment can range from how punctual you are to how you treat your coworkers to how you show respect for those in authority. So it gave us 3 different ways to be honest in the workplace. Managing our time responsibly, and we had a section in the responsibility unit of how to do that. Schedules, giving yourself goals, breaking down the things that you need to do, whether it's a checklist, whatever you need to do. Punctuality, okay? Whether you need to give yourself a checklist in the morning, whether you need to create a schedule for yourself in the morning so you can get to work on time. How you treat your coworkers, honesty. We talked about accountability. We talked about our tone of voice, our communication skills, and how you show respect to those in authority. Now remember, at some point in time, we will be those in authority. Even if it's not right now, some point in time, you will be that person in authority. So the question is, the way you choose to interact with those in authority now will most likely be the way you're interacted with. Again, the value and the importance of doing it, not just for yourself, but to understand why it's important to treat the other person with that respect. All right, so let's go back to the lesson plan, which is now on page 120, and read procedure number 4. It says, have students read and complete the scenarios found on pages 125 through 128. Note, any of the scenarios can be role-played to create greater interaction. Discuss their answers and the importance of giving credit to others, following rules and being truthful and trustworthy as ways in which honesty is demonstrated in the work environment. Lead a discussion with participants on times they were glad to follow the rules and policies while on the job. Now, I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to leave that for the next teacher to get into. But I want us to stop and think about everything that we learned. We talked about that, yes, honesty can mean different things to different people. But the lines of morality are being trustworthy, not taking credit from other people, following instructions, and it gave us that list, being punctual, being respectful. So when we think about it, what it really boils down to is doing what's best and what shows care and concern for the other person. And that's how we choose to be honest and create a work environment that doesn't just benefit the coworkers, but it creates an environment for ourselves right now and our future selves who will benefit from the choices that we make. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the next teacher.
Hello, everyone, and how are you all doing tonight? We're going to continue on with procedure 4, but before I do that, I want us to think about honesty, and I want us to think what honesty really means. I took the time before class to ask the question, what is honesty? And I asked in a little forum, what is honesty to you? I want to share some of those answers with you because we all have a different view of what honesty really is. The question that I asked again was, what is honesty? One of the answers came back, the truth in actions and words. The truth in actions and words. The next one that someone offered was someone who cares enough to tell you the truth no matter how hard it is to accept it. Now, remember at the beginning of the class, they said everybody has a different definition for honesty. Continuing on with some of the definitions that people sent in, telling the truth all the time, regardless of peer pressure or fear of getting in trouble for reporting something. Now, in the workplace, a lot of people don't report things that are going on because they're afraid of the reprisal that comes from it. They're afraid of what might occur if they report something or they tell the truth about it. And that can revert to or cause in workplace bullying and different things like that. So that was a really great answer for what we're studying. The next one was being honest means you respect yourself and those around you. You respect yourself. And to me that does show that you respect yourself, because if you have to lie your way through something, or if you have to lie to your boss, what kind of relationship are we creating within that workplace? The next one was living in congruence with what you say or lead people to believe you are. So in other words, you're a living example of what you're doing. I've got 4 more. The next one was honesty is not just about telling the truth. And remember at the beginning of the class, I said most everybody, looked at honesty as just telling the truth. It's about being real with yourself and others. and about being loyal. When you are honest, you get the most out of life. You're not hiding behind anything. Think about that. We're not hiding behind anything when we're being honest, because we don't have to wonder, what did we say, or how did I phrase it this way? You're thinking about what you're living the truth. The next one was, to me, it means being truthful and sincere. The next one was that you can be counted on. It also hurts when someone doubts your honesty. When you try your best not to let anyone down. Because when someone's not honest with you, how do you feel? And as you're learning to teach about honesty within the workplace, you have to be able to empathize and you have to be able to connect with these. And the final one that I received was, honesty means to tell the truth, be fair, and be sincere. And I've really enjoyed the responses that came and everything, because it really made me stop and think about all that honesty is. And it's not just about telling the truth. It's a bigger picture. And as the first teacher was explaining when she was going through Procedure 3, she was sharing the different things that ties in with it. But as we're learning to be teachers within the workplace, we also have to remember to make sure, and we have to share with our class to make sure that they understand what certain words mean. So I want to just cover a couple things on page 124. In the first paragraph, it used the word restraint. Now, make note in your book that restraint means the need, or indicates the need for self-control. We have to have self-control to be honest, because if we just go and say whatever's on our mind because we're nervous or whatever like that, then we're not really being honest. So the word restraint indicates that you need self-control. They also used in the second paragraph the word rude. And that is defined as offensively impolite or ill-natured, or ill-mannered, excuse me. Rude is offensively impolite or ill-mannered. And the next word that they defined was callous. And callous is defined as showing or having an insensitive and cruel disregard for others. And you see that a lot in a lot of the workplaces that we visited and everything like that. It's showing or having an insensitive or cruel disregard for others. And remember, the Peaceful Solution teaches us to respect all life and to have that respect for everyone. Well, you have to have it in the workplace too. You're going to be meeting people with different beliefs, different dialects, different cultures, and all these different things. So you have to respect these things in order to have that peace within the workplace. And the last paragraph in the first section, when she read it, it made me think of tact. And tact is T-A-C-T, in case I'm pronouncing it wrong because of my accent. But it says, real problems occur when our verbal and physical acts of dishonesty cross the lines of what is acceptable. These dishonest acts can cause harm to others, lead to the lack of trust or confidence, end with property loss or damage or even life. And the thing is when we say something, if we don't use tact, if we're not thinking about the words that are coming out of our mouth, we can offend somebody, and we could cause that person, because we don't know the background of everybody, we can cause that person to react in a manner that's not beneficial for the company. So these are the things that we want to stop and think about. And then if we look at the very bottom paragraph, at the bottom section, most people think of honesty only means, most people think honesty only means not lying, but do not understand that you're stealing from the authority when you disrespect them. There's so many ways in business that we can steal and we can take from that company. We want to keep those things in mind. Now, looking over at Procedure 4, back on page 120, we're going to read it again just so that it's clear because I kind of went off track, so please forgive me. But Procedure 4 says, have students read and complete the scenarios found on pages 125 through 128. And it tells us to note any of the scenarios that can be role-played to create greater interaction. And when you're teaching these classes on a smaller scale, it gives that great way of connecting with what the teacher is teaching. So think of ways that you can actually incorporate that into your teaching. Discuss their answers and the importance of giving credit to others, following the rules, and being truthful and trustworthy as ways in which honesty is demonstrated in the work environment. Lead a discussion with participants on times they were glad they followed the rules and policies while on the job. Now think about it. What's the work environment like when you don't follow the rules that are set up, or when you don't follow the standards or the policies or something like that? Does it make for a peaceful work environment? Most of the time, the answer is going to come back no. If you work by yourself, it's not really going to matter. But think about it. If we don't follow the steps that are in place, we could be causing the company lots and lots of damage because we don't know the full reasons a lot of the time why those policies and procedures were put into place. They were put into place as safety nets, most likely, to protect the company from anything that could cause harm to that company. So we can't stress that enough when we're talking about honesty. How many know what a time card is? Some of us had to use a time card where we had to actually write in the time that we worked. Today, it's a fingerprint, a thumbprint, or something like that. You type in your number and you put your fingerprint on it and it records what time you got to work. It makes it more foolproof for cheating because you actually have to have the fingerprint to be able to record your time. But there was a time when you had to write in your time card. You get to work at 8:05, but you jot down 8 o'clock because that's the time you're supposed to be there. Well, that's not being honest. If you take a break and your break goes 45 minutes when it's only supposed to be a half hour, you just put down that half hour and don't worry about the 15 minutes. These are ways that shows dishonesty within the workplace. A time card is defined as a card used to record an employee's starting and quitting times, usually stamped by a time clock. Well, that was many years ago, and like I said, now it's pretty much digital and electronic. This determines the wages you are getting paid, and that's why it's so important to have honesty when it comes to our time cards and our time clocks. Now we're going to continue on with page 125, and we're going to begin with honesty means following the rules. Being honest at work also means not going against or purposely ignoring the rules and policies that govern proper conduct in your work area. In order to do this, one must know what the procedures are and work diligently to follow them. Now, sometimes there can be a whole lot of procedures, and you don't remember them instantly. So you have to keep rehearsing them and rehearsing them. It doesn't mean that you're dishonest because you forget or you don't remember or something. But eventually you're going to remember all the stipulations and the rules and the standards. And as a team member or an employee, you want to try to do the very best that you can to learn these steps because that's going to bring that peace within the workplace. Read the following scenario and answer the questions that follow. See page 120 for answers, for those of you that have the manual that gives you the answers. Philip asked Brian if he could punch his time card for him because he was going to be a little bit late. Brian agreed. Okay, now think about that. Was that being honest? Did Philip behave in an honest fashion? And when you ask that question to your students that you're going to be teaching, follow it up with, explain why you answered that. Well, was Philip behaving honestly? No, he wasn't, because he was asking someone to do something to cover up the fact that he was going to be late. The next question, did Brian behave honestly? Do you think Brian behaved honestly? No, because he helped the other person steal from the company. Because when you say, I got there at 8 o'clock, but you really got there at 8:10, then you're claiming time that you aren't there doing the job you get paid to do. So it wasn't an honest, Brian wasn't behaving honestly as well. What are some consequences that could come from Philip and Brian's dishonest act? What are some of the consequences that could come from that? Well, one of the consequences would be that they'd lose their job because they're stealing from the company. And if everybody stole 10 minutes or 15 minutes, let's say 4 people stole 15 minutes, that's an hour's time. If the rate of pay is $10, then that's $40 in 1 hour. Well, it's $10 for 1 hour. So, and you do that in a 40-hour week, that's $400. So stop and think of the repercussions that can come from that type of dishonesty. So if we look back to page 120, some of the answers given by the book. Did Philip behave honestly? Explain your answer. The answer is no, because he asked Brian to do something dishonest. 2, did Brian behave honestly? Also explain your answer. And the answer is no, because he agreed to do something dishonest. That says something about our character. When we want to or we choose to do something dishonest for somebody that's our friend or something like that, that says something about our character. And the third is, what were some of the consequences that could come from Philip and Brian's dishonest act? Loss of time and productivity within the workplace. The supervisor could find out and dock them both for stealing time. And there's so many other repercussions that can come from it. I know where I used to work, if someone was caught stealing, it was immediate dismissal. And because the time clock was set up in a way that you had to have your fingerprint to punch in and punch out, they couldn't steal in that way. But if you work in certain departments, such as the laundry department or dishwashers or something like that, your hands are always in heat and everything, which affects your fingerprints. So your fingerprints don't work on time clocks many times. So then you erase what they call the biometrics, and they just punch the number in. Well, then the foolproof way of telling time can now be broken. Okay, let's continue on. In the above scenario, not only was Philip dishonest, but he motivated another coworker to be dishonest as well. Instead of agreeing to punch Philip's time card, Brian should have refused and encouraged Philip to make a greater effort to get to work on time. And the peaceful solution tells us so much. And here they're showing us a solution to someone that tries to get us to help them with something that's not right. Always think the positive. Always look for the positive when you're teaching the peaceful solution. And as they're pointing out here, instead of doing that, encourage them to do what's right. And that's how you're going to change and help to change the character and the minds of so many people. And you're going to make the workplace a better place. I was once asked to do something that would have humiliated another manager. And when I was asked to do that, I turned and I looked at the person that asked that, and I said, why would I want to do that if I wouldn't want it done to myself? And that's what we have to stop and think. If we don't want things done to us, then we need to encourage others not to do them as well. But do it with tact. Do it in a way that will benefit those people, to make them stop and think. Because the best thing you can do in the peaceful solution is get people to stop and think. Because when we can get people to stop and think, they begin to understand what's actually being taught. The quote below says, sometimes being honest means you don't win, but it's better to lose honestly than to win dishonestly. Okay, let's go over to page 126 to the next scenario. Honesty means being truthful. So honesty means following the rules, and now we're learning that honesty also means being truthful. Honesty means being truthful. It appears that many people make up excuses for missing work, for going to work late, for poorly completing a task, or for not completing a task at all. Read the following scenarios and answer the questions to follow. And then we're going to go back to page 120 to see the examples from the book. Betty stayed up late the night before and woke up late for work, knowing there was no way she could get to work on time. She called her supervisor and told her that she was having car trouble and would be in as soon as possible. Okay, red flags are starting to go up, and we're looking at what Betty did. Was Betty being truthful? No, she wasn't being truthful, because what if she didn't stop to think that she had a brand new 2020 vehicle? That was not a problem. You have to be honest in everything you do. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm running late, I'll be there shortly. Sometimes you don't even have to give that excuse unless the boss says, is everything okay? No, I overslept, I didn't hear my alarm. Be honest. We're not perfect. And if we can teach people to be honest, it helps. But it's also going to encourage them to want to try harder to get to work on time. What are some consequences that could come from Betty's dishonesty? Explain your answer. Well, what if the boss drives right by Betty's place and sees her car still in the driveway? Well, then that shows her dishonesty, her untruthfulness. So get them to start thinking of the repercussions, because everybody's heard that saying, it's a small world. And sometimes you run into people and situations that you normally wouldn't have thought. So let's look over at honesty means being truthful on page 120. It says, was Betty truthful? It says, was Betty truthful? Explain your answers. No, she lied about the reason she was late for work. And number 2, what are some consequences that could come from Betty's dishonesty? Explain your answer. Supervisor could find out the truth. Betty could ruin her reputation by continuing being late for false reasons and then not be believed when she actually has a legitimate reason. Now, I was on my way to work one year, and I had a little blue car. And on my way to work, because I had to travel about 20 miles to get to work, I had to, and I had a flat tire. So back then we didn't have cell phones. So when I finally got to work, I explained it to my boss, and he said, you don't need to be driving a car with tires that are hazardous. And he made me take my car to the car place, and he had all new tires put on the car to make sure that I was safe making that trip. Well, part of that comes from honesty and trustworthiness. Yes, I paid him back, but I was able to do it over a little bit at a time and things like that. So you want to build that honest reputation within the work environment. So let's go back to page 126, and let's read the next scenario. regarding honesty means being truthful. Bob and Justin are friends. During a break time, Justin decided to play a practical joke on Edward. Edward did not appreciate the joke, and he and Justin got into a conflict. Mr. Green, the foreman, had to stop Justin and Edward from arguing. When Mr. Green asked Bob if he knew who started the conflict, Bob said that Edward started it. Was Bob being truthful? No. Because he knew who started it because of the practical joke. What are some consequences that could come from Bob's dishonest answer? Well, it could have got a whole lot more heated, or it could continue. It could also ruin Bob's reputation because he stood up for the one that was being the bully, that played the practical joke. Was he protecting himself because he had already discussed it prior to it taking place? Let's turn back to page 120, and let's look at number 3. Was Bob truthful? Explain your answer. Not completely. He did not tell Justin's role in the conflict. There's always two sides to every story, and as we are learning the peaceful solution so that we can teach it to others, we want to make sure that we remember there's always two sides to every story. And we want to make sure that we get both sides when there is a conflict within the workplace. And number 4, what are some consequences that could come from Bob's dishonest answer? Justin would not be corrected for his behavior. Edward might face consequences for starting a conflict. Bob might be regarded as a liar when the whole story is found out, because nothing ever stays hidden. It's always going to come out eventually. Now let's continue back on page 126, and it says, sometimes it becomes very difficult to make an honest decision where friends are concerned. And as we're in our work environment, we do develop friendships, and we build friendships and everything like that. And you sometimes tend to have that leaning more towards one side than the other. But we have to remember that no matter what kind of a friendship we have with the person that we work with, we still have to be truthful. Because when we stop being truthful when it comes to a particular person even, it's going to mar our character. And we have to get people to realize that when we're teaching them, because they might think that it's not any big thing, but it is, because it's saying something about your character. Stop and consider the consequences. Are your moral values at stake? Yes, they are. Will someone's feelings get hurt? Feelings that can be healed later? Or are you bringing harm to anyone by your decisions? How many have ever been hurt by something that has occurred in the workplace by another coworker? Does the hurt go away? Or does it just get easier to deal with? When we can start getting the people that work with us to think about those things, to think how our actions affect others, then we can begin to grow and build that honesty and that trustfulness within the workplace. At the bottom of the page, it has a quote. It says, under any circumstances, make a wise, upstanding choice. Because the bottom line is it's your choice in what you say and what you do within the workplace. Now let's move over to page 127. We've just covered that honesty means following rules. Honesty means being truthful. Now we're going to look at honesty means giving credit to others. It is important to maintain a team spirit in the workplace. This involves cooperation, sharing ideas, and building a plan together. with no one person taking all the credit for the project or the idea. Acknowledge each person's input in order to encourage further cooperativeness and team attitude. I can't stress how important that is, because if you want to build that team, that working unity, you have to be able to encourage others and push others forward and not be concerned about pushing yourself forward, because it's not about pushing us forward. It's about us all walking forward together and accomplishing the tasks that are at hand. So let's look at the scenario about this one. Jane and Susan were asked to brainstorm solutions to a problem with the waitresses. Jane came up with a solution they both agreed would be the one they presented as an answer to the problem. When they talked to their boss, Susan took sole responsibility for providing the solution to the problem. In fact, she acted like Jane did not contribute anything at all. Did Susan behave honestly? No, Susan didn't behave honestly. And stop and think how it might have made Jane feel insignificant, like it wasn't important what she contributed. We have to build one another up, and that's part of honesty, by giving credit where credit is due. And these are things that we can take to heart and remember. So let's go back to page 120, and let's see the answer in the book. And it says, honesty means giving credit to others. Did Susan behave honestly? And explain your answers. No, she took all the credit for their work and did not share Jane's part. Remember, it takes more than one person to be able to accomplish the things that go on within the workplace. I'm going to take, for example, I worked in a hotel for 20 years. And I worked in a lot of the departments. But if we didn't have the housekeepers to clean the rooms, we couldn't rent the rooms so that we could bring more money in. And if something got broken in the rooms and we didn't have a maintenance team to fix the things within the room, we couldn't sell that room. And if we were having a banquet and we didn't have the cooks and the waitresses to handle that banquet or that function, then again, it's stifling everything. So if you're working the front desk and you say, hey, I've got it easy, I don't have to clean these rooms, or I don't have to fix this, or I don't have to cook and clean, well, if you don't have any guests, you don't have a job anyway. So that is when you take everything that's within the business that you're in and you build from it. So let's finish this page. It says, taking credit for someone else's work or taking sole credit for something you and a coworker did together is dishonest, arrogant, and selfish. Although everyone wants to be praised, to feel valued, and to be considered for a higher position, dishonest means are not the way to achieve your goal. We should never seek credit for ourselves by discrediting someone else. Don't earn the reputation of being one who blames others when mistakes occur, but take all the credit when something goes right. Maintain a team spirit that will build a productive and peaceful environment. And the quote at the bottom says, honesty means taking your fair share. And with that, we're going to stop. There's one more. I encourage you to read it over and read forward, for when class comes next week. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to next week. Have a great night.